right, we are back at it, folks, going over the blog that Joi Ito sent to Jeffrey Epstein just 9 months after the death of Aaron Swartz. Now, again, just for context, I want to remind everybody that the conversation leading up to that email is Jeffrey asking Joi, need directions as to MIT publicity concerns. Joi responds back with, not sure what you mean, shall we chat on the phone? And Jeffrey sends a number. Joi Ito then messages Jeffrey saying that I'm worried about somebody seeing you and Woody Allen at this open house at MIT. Then an hour later says, and then there was this recently, and sends a link to the blog. I remind you of this lead up because Ito is most definitely mentioned in the blog. The blog starts out by talking about how Joi used to run a nightclub in Tokyo's Yakuza district. Apparently, after Joi Ito dropped out of Tufts and the University of Chicago, he became a DJ at a nightclub that I'm very familiar with called Smart Bar in Chicago. I went there so many times in my 20s. I bring this up to you because there's something weird about his whole DJ story. And I found in this interview where he talks about when he was going to nightclubs, this was in the early 80s, when AIDS were rampant. I felt like I needed to understand the community. And he talks a lot about how DJs control the room. Well, Joi Ito was born in 1966. So this would be him at 15 in the early 80s. But let's back up and really dive into his life. Ito was born in Japan, and at age 3, he and his family moved to Canada, then to the United States. They moved to Detroit, Michigan, where his father was a research scientist, and his mother was a secretary for Energy Conversion Devices, Inc., now Ovonics. The founder of that company was a man named Stanford Ovchinsky. Now, his success mostly comes from an engineering background, as well as being one of the best inventors of our generation, holding the key to over 400 patents. In the 40s and 50s, he was into neurophysiology and basically pioneered the field of amorphous and disordered materials. He was also self-taught, which is weird to me. I tell you all of this because he took a special interest in Joi. In fact, it's said that he thought of him almost as his son. He mentored his interests in technology and the social movement, and when Ito was 13, gave him work with scientists, saying he was not a child in the conventional sense. Well, that's a red flag. So I don't know if you'll have picked up on that theme of inappropriately older men making really close relationships with very young boys, especially when that very young boy is the son of his employees. Like, how did this even become a thing? And calling someone not a child in the conventional sense is creepy as F. So I wonder if his mother's promotion had anything to do with their creepy relationship. Because at 14, she was promoted to the president of Energy Conversion Devices in Japan, a bizarre upward trajectory for someone who started out as a secretary, in my opinion, but the new job required them to move back to Japan. Now, sometime in the 1980s, he was enrolled in both Tufts University and the University of Chicago. Both of those is when he immediately pretty much dropped out and started being a DJ. I'm curious about all of this just because he was never a U.S. citizen. So if he's dropping out of college and just working as a DJ, like, how was he staying in the country? And it's possible maybe he got around those rules because of the online program that he signed up for in 1985. But again, he never got a degree from it. And according to Joi, he also attended a university in Tokyo in the 90s, where according to his own words, in the summer of 1990, he was running a pretty weird nightclub in the same district in Tokyo that is mentioned by this blog. And let's not forget, the writer of this article is the former editor of Japan Times Daily, so I'm going to trust he probably has pretty intimate knowledge of the Yakuza and their workings. And in Joi Ito's own words, this was the summer that he met Timothy Leary. Well, Timothy Leary is the psychologist who basically brought the psychedelic movement into the forefront in the 60s and 70s, who Nixon called the most dangerous man in America. He was basically the front man for the hippie counterculture movement. Timothy worked at Harvard as a clinical psychologist, and after an experience with magic mushrooms in Mexico in 1960, he founded the Harvard Psilocybin Project. As part of the Concord prison experiment, he would administer magic mushrooms to inmates to reduce recidivism. He spent years studying to try and figure out if they could get positive behavioral changes from people who are released from prison. According to this investigative journalist Kinzer, Tim Leary's interest in psychedelics was actually sparked by an article that appeared in Life magazine in 1957. It was about a couple of Americans who went to Mexico, found some magic mushrooms, did hallucinogens, but apparently that entire story was planted by Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb was the CIA chemist who was in charge of the MK Ultra project. You know, the CIA's mind control program. Basically, through shell corporations, the CIA would fund the research through universities. So the entire hippie movement was basically started by the CIA. Now, after he was fired from Harvard, it seems like the government really wanted this guy to go to prison. I mean, in 1966, he was convicted of possessing gardening materials and sentenced to 30 years in prison and ordered to undergo psychiatric treatment. A ruling he took all the way up to the Supreme Court to get overturned. On the same day that his conviction was overturned, he announced his candidacy for governor of California against Ronald Reagan. And y'all know the John Lennon song, Come Together? It was written for Tim Leary's campaign. However, about 8 months later, he received a 10-year sentence for a 1968 arrest in which he claims that, things were planted on him. He then escaped from prison. When he was caught in 1973, long story short, he got a 15-year sentence. He was put in solitary confinement at the Folsom prison, and he was placed in a cell next to Charles Manson. This is important because it's long been believed that Charles Manson was a part of the MK Ultra program. And oh so conveniently, Timothy Leary joined the FBI's witness protection program because he became an FBI informant. In 1976, Governor Jerry Brown released Leary from prison. The Brown family, very much closely tied with the Pelosi, the Getty family, and a certain governor's family. If you don't know why that's important, make sure you go watch the video I posted about it on the Tube of You. I highly recommend it because it was a video that was so good they wouldn't let me post it here. At this point, you may be asking yourself, Jay, what does this have to do with Joi Ito? Well, it just so happens that Joi Ito is a godson of Timothy Leary. And that same summer he was running a nightclub in Tokyo was the same summer that he met Timothy Leary. And in his tribute to Timothy Leary, he admits that he actually owned that club. Now, this is Joi Ito's own words about how he met Tim Leary, saying that Tim was excited about virtual reality and told his friend David Kubiak in Quito to help him track down young Japanese kids who know about virtual reality. And even though he admits that he was not a VR expert, David introduced the two. Now, mind you, David Kubiak was the editor of the Kyoto Journal at the time, in fact was a contributing editor for 24 years, but at the exact same time he was a lecturer in mass communications, social mimicry, as well as propaganda. Now, Ito is credited as bringing rave culture to Japan, being the one to foster the underground party scene. He himself wrote for Wired magazine, "You change the music and you change the way the community behaves." So it's a little concerning that how he and Tim were talking about the rave and cyberpunk cultures in Japan, and Tim basically labeled Japanese youth as the new breed. Tim Leary actually famously had a catchphrase of tune in, turn on, drop out, that after meeting Ito, he changed into tune in, turn on, take over. They also talked about the retention of childlike attributes in adulthood, which he felt was exhibited in the culture of the Japanese youth. Now, there's a word for this called Neoteny, the evolutionary process where adult organisms retain juvenile physical or behavioral traits. So maybe someone can explain to me why Joi Ito named his venture capital and investment firm in 2000 Neoteny. Now, to me, it's really weird to take someone at the age of 24 and consider them your godson. But as we've seen over and over again, it seems like this ring sucks in valuable people and then turns them into family so that they will be loyal to you. Which is evident in this story he talks about where Tim picked him and his mother and his sister up for a weekend in San Francisco, organizing a huge party at a publishing friend's house, and Ito's sister met her future husband, Scott Fisher, who not only worked on virtual reality, so he already had somebody in his group to talk to about that, but he got his master's degree at where? MIT. Under who? His thesis advisor, Nicholas Negroponte. The guy who founded the Technology Media Lab at MIT. I mean, I covered all of this stuff in my last video of my series. And not only, let's not forget Negroponte's connection to Bernard Krischer. Krischer was also the Newsweek Tokyo bureau chief. Not only that, he was deeply tied to Japan, including humanitarian projects there, as well as being a prominent figure in the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. Which means Bernard probably ran in the same circles as the friend who introduced Tim Leary to Ito. Now, this article comes from a piece Ito wrote called The Responsibility of Immortality. Welcome to the New Transhumanism. And while it was written in 2018, when you look at it through today's eyes, it's giving some red flags. Like talking about how humans have longed for immortality since the Epic of Gilgamesh, referencing the Greek gods. And I swear to God, an actual line in this is, "The road that brought us Cambridge Analytical and the Pizzagate conspiracy was paved with optimism and oaths to not be evil." The man was just randomly throwing in Pizzagate in this article. This article seems to indicate that Ito's main qualifications for his job at MIT was being the godson of Timothy Leary, and that the MIT Media Lab is just a spin-off of MK Ultra and DARPA. I mean, it makes sense to me that Tim Leary, first unwillingly working for the CIA, and then turning state's evidence and willingly working for them, would use the club kid culture to once again run a psyops for the government. I mean, his sister is a Japanese cultural anthropologist. Her specialty was researching how teens and young adults in Japan and US engage with new media and emerging technology. I mean, it's basically Josie and the Pussycats, but human trafficking style. Now, normally I like to bury the lead a little bit in my stories, give people something to anticipate, build up the drama a little bit, but I know people have been waiting for a very long time for me to finish my Aaron Swartz expose. I do not believe that Aaron Swartz ended his own life, or if he did, he was intentionally psychologically tricked into it. This has been my belief ever since I found this email from Joi Ito from MIT to Jeffrey. So if you haven't seen the first couple parts of this expose, please go and watch those because this is very important. I say this because today we're going to talk about the day that Aaron died. His girlfriend at the time was a woman named Taren Stinebrickner-Kauffman. And before we get into her account of what happened that day, I want to tell you that I discovered a very, very interesting familial connection. She was the granddaughter of Rear Admiral Draper Kauffman and the great-granddaughter of Vice Admiral James L. Kauffman. Her grandfather was not only a Navy SEAL, not only the 44th Superintendent of the United States Naval Academy, but if any of y'all are military out there, you might recognize the name Kauffman as a boat in the Navy, specifically named after the grandfather and the great-grandfather. But there is an entire training complex called the Draper L. Kauffman Naval Special Warfare Operations Facility out of Virginia. And guess who Draper Kauffman's sister is married to? Prescott Bush Jr., as in the brother of George H.W. Bush. As we know, H.W. was in intelligence work, as was Kauffman. And yes, we are not our families. That's true for normal people. Not so much true for these kind of people. Now, Taren's mother worked as a correctional officer for prisons. She wrote a book about it in the 80s, which can literally be found on the Department of Justice's website. So yeah, when I found out that she and Aaron started dating after his arrest and before his trial, I got a little suspicious of her motives. She does tout herself as a social justice warrior, which I find odd given her family's history with the military and growing up in Indiana. There's just a line that's not connecting for me, especially when you take into consideration that his first lawyer had informed the prosecutor that Aaron was a unaliving risk, to which that prosecutor replied with, "Fine, we'll lock him up." Just, clearly the attitude was, we don't care. Now, I'm going to do a lot of reading here, so I'm not really going to interject. I just want to get your reaction to what she claims was the events that happened that day, and then we're going to talk about it after. I asked him what was wrong, and he said again, "I'm still alive." I said, "Love, I know this is really hard, but we're going to win this case, and you're going to be able to work on your project." He said, "Stop lying to me." I said, "I'm not lying to you. I really believe that. You said it yourself just a few days ago. It's going to be a great year." I opened the blinds. I got my laptop and turned on a song. He changed the song to Fond Farewell. She turned it off. I got a cup of water and came over to throw it on him. He picked up my laptop and held it in front of him as a shield. I kneeled next to him and tried a tickling strategy. He started kicking, lashing out with his legs hard. I dodged most of them, but he caught me a couple times. They were hard kicks, pretty violent. I got a cup of water again and threw it on him. He jumped up and filled a cup himself and threw it on me. Then he ran over to the bathroom and started to close the door. I was afraid of what he would do in there alone, so I held the handle down so the door wouldn't lock while the handle was down. "Please don't lock the door. I'm afraid you're going to hurt yourself." She tells him she needs to take a shower, and so she does. He put on his favorite outfit, a V-neck, black t-shirt, and tan corduroy pants we'd bought together a few weeks before, so that he'd have something nice to wear for the trial. Then he put on his coat. I thought he was in a rush to head to the office, so I got ready as quickly as I could. He said, "I'm not coming." I said, "Really? Why'd you put on your coat?" He shrugged. I said, "Okay, I'll stay here with you. I'll take the day off. We can go for a hike or something." He shook his head. "No, you go to the office. I need to be alone. I leave you here. You won't eat." "I'll go, but only if you promise me two things. You'll eat something and that you won't hurt yourself. I promise." And then I left. I set up dinner for that evening with Ben and tried texting Aaron about it. I noticed that the texts were showing up in the color that they were showing up when they're not being received. That worried me a little bit, but not overly. I thought maybe he was just sleeping or felt like he needed the day off. I was worried enough about Aaron that when I arrived at the building and while I was at the elevator, I got my phone out and plugged in my password and put on the call screen so that if I needed to call 911, I'd be able to do immediately. I felt silly during it. It seemed like a crazy precaution to take, but I felt like it didn't cost me anything to do it. I didn't have anything else to do while in the elevator. The room was dark. I looked for him on the bed, and then I saw him hanging from the window by his belt. I screamed and ran over to him. He was wearing the same clothes and still had his coat on. I called 911, and I couldn't remember our address. I was screaming. They thought I was saying Sterling Place instead of Sullivan Place. Finally, they got it. I hung up and ran into the hallway screaming. I hadn't tried to get him down or even really touched him yet. I ran in and touched his face. He didn't feel cold to the touch. He was probably warmer than room temperature, but he clearly wasn't body temperature either. I gave up and went back outside. aside, I didn't try to cut him down or anything, though I'm not sure why. I'm sorry, what? Did any of that story make sense to you guys? And I'm sorry, this whole water throwing, using her laptop as a shield, tickling strategy, all of that feels like a fucking lie. That feels like there was a physical scuffle and she was using this story as an excuse for something. Whether it might be bruises she might have had or he had. Not to mention the very act of having to go and refill a cup of water in the sink several times to come through. Why would anybody just stand there and let that happen? And then you were so worried that he would hurt himself that you wouldn't let him go in the bathroom, which sounds like to me he was trying to run away from you. But then you leave and you don't tell anybody that you're having these suspicions that he might hurt himself, and then make a point to make dinner plans with someone, even though you know he's feeling awful today, without checking with him first. And then the texts went through and they were different colors, which usually still goes through even if your phone is off. It doesn't become a different color. If it was a different color, it means he blocked you. But instead of checking on him or sending anyone to check on him, you just go about and work your whole workday. You were still so worried that you dialed 911 and had it ready on your phone. Maybe you figured out that they can tell when somebody actually punches in those numbers as opposed to when they call them. But you had that on the ready, like you were expecting something when you went into your apartment. And then you were so conveniently screaming so much that you forgot to help him, forgot to touch him, couldn't even get the name of the place sounding right. Then you give up and go back into the hallway screaming. And mind you, in one of the court filings, I was able to find their address, the exact apartment and number that they lived in, and I looked it up. He specifically said he was in their bedroom when he did it. I'm curious what part of these windows would actually support someone's full body weight, because anybody who's ever lived in a big city apartment like this knows that these little brackets are about this big. They are just added afterwards, and there is nothing that would actually ground somebody in there. They are cheap. They only hold a very thin bar, because mine used to fall off of it all the time, and there's no way the metal pole wouldn't have bent under the weight. And I really thought I was going to get everything in on this video, but it's getting really long, so I'm going to do another part to this, because there are a lot of other little clues that Taren says that makes me think that she was sent there, to psychologically get in his head. And sorry, not sorry, the Bush family is not one of those families that you just meet and marry into. You are vetted. And it's just, in my opinion, that someone that closely related to the Bush family, like second cousins through marriage? There's just no way in my head that these people could have fallen that far from their family tree. That's just not how these things operate. However, we need to go back and talk about Taren's mother, Kelsey Kauffman, who is currently running for a seat in Indiana House. In 1971, Kelsey Kauffman graduated in the first co-ed graduating class at Yale University. She then spent a year working in the correctional facility in Connecticut and went back to Harvard for her doctorate in education, with her thesis being writing a dissertation on the psychological toll prison work takes on officers. And it's weird because they call her a lifelong prison reform activist. I couldn't really find any work before 2012. Before he started dating Taren, he was in an open relationship with a woman named Quinn Norton. She was a journalist who covered hacker culture, the Occupy movement, Anonymous, etc. So she did a lot of activism on the internet. And I fully believe that she is the one who kind of diverted Aaron into that path. In 2009, Aaron started suddenly getting really interested in politics and finding out how things work. Also believed that influence of money in American politics was an enormous problem that possibly little else could get solved until that was. And he found that most activism didn't work on a large scale because of it. He couldn't stand that there were so many bad, inefficient nonprofits out there eating up donor money. Mind you, Taren has done nothing but work at nonprofits, starting nonprofits, and now currently works as a nonprofit think tank for AI. He told her that he thought that her nonprofits would be harmful to his future organization, and he told her that he had to design tactics that could be subjugated to controlled experiments. Maybe the reason for his arrest in 2009, in which he did something almost exactly the same as he was arrested for at MIT, only he did it with Pacer. Obviously, this is when he really got on the government's radar. And mind you, they couldn't even come up with anything to try and charge him on for this one. After Aaron was arrested in January of 2010 for downloading all of those documents from MIT, the prosecutors subpoenaed Quinn Norton and basically strong-armed her into cooperating with them, because my guess is they were going to try and charge her too, since he used her credit card to buy the laptop that he downloaded everything on. And because Quinn had a 7-year-old child that Aaron absolutely adored, or all they were together for 4 years, they even talked about him taking a plea bargain. just to protect her. Now, Taren and Aaron met sometime in the summer of 2009. Later in 2011, Quinn and Aaron broke up, and Taren and Aaron started dating in July of 2011. Quinn said that most of 2010 was her trying to keep Aaron alive, and his first lawyer told the prosecutors that their client was a self-unaliving risk, and then they threatened to throw him in jail. So when he and Taren started dating, according to her, he swears that he was turning over a new leaf, that his depression was a thing of the past, and that he started doing the dishes again, and that he spent a whole month away from technology. And according to her, it was the happiest that he'd ever been, and that she encouraged him constantly to do it again. It just so happens that Taren and him got together right before his indictment. On July 14th, he was indicted on 4 felony counts. And by October of 2011, Marty Weinberg takes over as Aaron Swartz's new defense attorney. And it just so happened that Taren and Aaron moved to New York in November of 2011, right when the state indicted him. Then in the first half of 2012, Aaron's mother got seriously ill after a routine operation, and she was in a coma, which means her dad had to stop working on Aaron's case and go take care of her, which means a lot of the responsibility now fell on Aaron to work his own case. What's weird is that Marty Weinberg works for an entire year on Aaron's case, right? October 26, 2012, MIT's outside counsel notifies Martin Weinberg that MIT is willing to attend a meeting with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and yet 5 days later, Marty Weinberg withdraws as Aaron Swartz defense counsel. The next week, his new counsel says that they will no longer seek participation in a meeting with that attorney and the MIT, during which Taren admits that she said that her mother was a criminal justice activist, so prison wasn't weird to her, and she was trying to normalize it for him. But Aaron didn't discuss the case with anybody but his father and his lawyer. Now, everybody seems to talk about how fragile Aaron was and how innocent he was. But according to Taren, she said the first time she ever worried about his depression was on the morning of January 11th when he died. That there were probably signs that she should have picked up on and that he intentionally hid them from her. But then they also talked about getting married and that they would talk about it more after the trial was over. According to this article, the couple went on a ski holiday in Vermont in early 2013. Well, if he died January 11th, 2013, then clearly they had just gone to Vermont literally days before he ended his life. And it doesn't really track for me that she claims that she didn't see any signs and she never worried about his depression. One of his best friends said that they had a pretty intense ritual of renting a zip car and putting all of their electronic devices outside of the car and sitting in it with the radio turned up because he was concerned about people listening. And perhaps maybe he started to have reasons not to trust his girlfriend. Because yes, on January 9th, the federal prosecutors did turn down a plea deal that would have kept Aaron out of prison. But on the morning that he died, his lawyer discovered proof that the prosecutors conspired with the Secret Service in order to get illegally collected evidence. And they filed a motion to suppress it. And yes, reading it, I fully believed that they were going to get it thrown out and quite possibly fully dismissed because Aaron was being pressured into waiving his constitutional rights for a trial by having them threaten the maximum of this ridiculous sentence. He and his new lawyers had come up with this whole PR strategy to get public outrage on their side. Government knew that they were effed. So whatever Aaron was really doing, because we now know that he was working with Anonymous at this time, whatever Aaron was doing, whatever he actually took from MIT that they couldn't actually talk about, was on the verge of being discovered. They needed this not to go to trial, not only for prosecutorial misconduct, but to cover up whatever was happening at MIT. Because remember, Aaron's father worked as a consultant at MIT. The morning that Aaron died, I think he had put everything together because it sounds like he and Taren were actually breaking up that morning. Now, I really want you to read between the lines. She asked him what's wrong and he said, "I'm still alive." And she's like, "I know it's really hard, but you're going to win the case and you're going to be able to work on your project." And he's like, "Stop lying to me." She's like, "I'm not lying to you. I really believe that. You said that yourself. It's going to be a great year." She gets up and she puts on a song called "If You Think You Need Some Lovin'." I looked up the lyrics to that, and some of these lyrics are like, "If you need a shrink, you're draining down the sink. Well, go take a hike. Ain't got no time for your baggage. If you think you need a fix, don't put me in the mix. Just stick to wine, wine, wine. But if you need some lovin', that's fine." According to Taren, he stopped the song before it was over and put on a song, Fond Farewell. She attributed to him like wanting to end his own life, but then found out later it was about addiction, so she didn't worry anymore. She said that about halfway through the song, she turned it off and was like, oh, no more of that. And I looked up the lyrics to this song. Some of them are, "'Cause you took apart a picture that wasn't right. This is not my life, it's just a fond farewell to a friend. I see you're leaving me and taking up with the enemy. Good and evil matched perfect in a great romance." And if she said she literally had never worried about his depression before this morning, why was her instinct to go and get a cup of water and dump it on him? Then go get a second cup of water and try to throw it on him? Because that's assault. I'm sorry, but that's assault. But it actually feels like it is a cover for trying to explain why maybe the apartment was wet. Because the story conveniently travels to the bathroom and she's taking a shower, and perhaps the kicking and stuff might explain some bruises on either him or her. Not only do I think it's weird that she suggested that they go for a hike in January in New York, but it was also a lyric in the song that she was playing. She also said that when he was getting dressed that he put on his favorite outfit, a V-necked black t-shirt and the tan corduroy pants we bought together a few weeks before, so that he'd have something nice to wear for the trial. How could that be his favorite outfit if you literally just bought the pants? Given her family background, her connection to the Bushes, the sheer timing of her in his life, not to mention reframing that day, and just looking at the events of things, it feels like her entire story was just trying to explain things that maybe people would have found suspicious. But unfortunately, those autopsies, those police reports, none of those have ever surfaced. And believe me, I'm sure I would find a lot more evidence if I ever got my hands on that. But I officially believe that I have gone as far as I can with this case. This is officially the last video. You wanted to change the world, Aaron, and they stopped you from doing it.